Welcome to a special edition of the Amplify Digest. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and this has been a pretty challenging week in tech. We've seen a range of layoff announcements from Twitter to Stripe to Opendoor, Chime, Pleo, Lyft, and many more. And we're also in an environment where this is probably not the end. Wall Street Journal is reporting that sizable cuts are coming to Meta this week, and this is on the heels of a year where Gizmodo recently reported we've seen over 44,000 layoffs in tech alone. And so I wanted to dedicate this episode of the Amplify Digest is special coverage around layoffs and rifts. This is a scenario that many of us, if we haven't yet, we will experience at some point in our career, that is being laid off. If we work in HR and people operations, orchestrating layoffs and trying to do that with grace and humanity. And, that's not always easy. And it's very easy for people like me and everyone else to, scrutinize the way different companies have announced their layoffs or not announced their layoffs. And look, let's face it. Layoffs suck. They're difficult for everyone involved, particularly for those employees who are impacted. In many cases, companies, I think, are trying to do their best. I think Stripe's example last week with Patrick Collison and the email that he sent to staff that was super clear and concise around how impacted employees would be treated in terms of severance, equity vesting, and all those kinds of things. That is, I think, a model for how you want to think about this messaging. To the opposite of that, which is Twitter and, having a brutal 50% reduction in staff. There have been reports since that they've actually, fired some employees by accident. They're asking them to come back. There's ways to do this in a empathetic and humane ways, and there's a way to do this in not empathetic and humane ways. And obviously, from a future hiring standpoint, from an employer brand standpoint, and from a doing the right thing for humans standpoint, clarity is kindness, and the more clarity you can bring to these conversations, the more you can let people know why you're making the decision, how it's going to impact them, and just all of the details and the questions that employees will surely have, the better positioned your organization and your team will be for success beyond that. And these are difficult times, whether we're actually heading into a recession or just some level of economic downturn. These likely won't be the last reductions that we see in tech. And so in this episode, and particularly in the blog post accompanying this episode, I want to include a couple resources to help those of you who may be navigating either side of this. There's some examples of letters and communication announcements, including Stripes from Patrick Collison, that I think are great models for you to follow. There are resources, actually. There's a great open source resource that made the rounds from a kind of collection group in technology about how, if you're in an organization where you think layoffs may be coming, what are some things you can do to safeguard yourself as an employee in that scenario? So there's a resource there that helps give some context. And I want to also give thanks to one of my friends who will ask to remain anonymous. She had shared a valuable resource that they used for manager training and helping their managers navigate through the post layoff and RIF, leadership and support of their teams. And she graciously agreed to open source that, so you can find that template in these resources as well. And I also dug into the Amplify Academy Learning Lab, and I pulled some of the resources that I've curated in that Learning Lab out in the blog post. And that includes a really powerful layoff list template from Coda. So for those of you that may be in a position where you're having layoffs, obviously whatever you could do to help your employees who are impacted land on their feet is beneficial. So we've all seen layoff lists these days. Often they're put together in Google Sheets. They're a little hard to navigate. This is a really robust template in Coda that you can use for those purposes. There's also several really valuable open source resources that Pin has put together on a layoff, kind of tracking list. So if you are having to navigate layoffs and kind of coordinate those within an organization, it's a checklist of things that you should be thinking about, ranging to tips for managers on communication. So you can find that there. And given all of the instability right now, particularly, many of these organizations, HR people and recruiting teams are impacted by these reductions. I'm accelerating a new product that we've been working on within Amplify called the Amplify Talent Collective. And it is a tool to help people from my network connect with employers and job opportunities. And so you'll also find a link to that. I'm going to be launching that in the coming weeks. But if you want to go ahead and create your profile now, whether you want that to be a public profile or an anonymous profile, you can do that. So all of the resources that I just walked you through and more can be found on the blog post on amplifytalent.com. But I just want to, just send some love to everybody navigating this. These are difficult times. And, in this business climate that we're in, we're likely going to see some continued volatility into 2023. And to what extent, we don't know, but I think we have to be prepared for it as best we can. And so I'll continue to keep an eye open for, open source resources and bringing open source resources to the HR community to try to support those of you who are navigating this. And if you've been impacted by any of these layoffs or RIFs, definitely check out my LinkedIn profile. I started a thread last week after Twitter's layoff announcement asking recruiters from my network and HR members from my network if they were hiring to add their career site in the comments and talk about what they're hiring for. And there's over 350 comments there. So if you're looking for a job, I also recommend you check out that thread. That's a wrap for this week. I hope you all hang in there, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and I will see you next week.